Welcome back to Mystery Minds, the channel where we dive into the darkest corners of true crime, uncovering stories that shock, intrigue, and leave us questioning the world around us. In today's case, we uncover a chilling story from the streets of Detroit, a tale of ambition, betrayal, and a secret that spiraled into unimaginable violence. What happens when an underground empire begins to crumble, and those you trust most are the ones plotting your downfall? Stay with us as we unravel the dark and twisted story of the fall of kings, the rise and betrayal of Detroit's most feared duo. In a city where power is the ultimate currency, betrayal runs deep, and loyalty can be bought or broken in an instant. Marcus King Eldridge had built an empire that made him untouchable until the one man he trusted more than anyone, Tyrell Bennett, turned against him. What happens when the very person who helped you rise to the top is the one who brings you crashing down? This is a story of trust shattered, power stolen, and a fight for survival that will leave you questioning who can truly be trusted in the world of crime. Stay with us as we dive into the twisted tale of a betrayal so deep it would change everything. In the early 2000s, Detroit was a city defined by both its resilience and its struggles. Amidst the challenges of economic decline and rising crime, two names rose above the rest: Marcus King Eldridge and Tyrell Bennett. The duo had become the unchallenged kings of Detroit's criminal underworld, an empire built on fear, respect, and a keen understanding of the city's gritty dynamics. Marcus Eldridge, a man with an intellectual sharpness that could rival any criminal mastermind, was the orchestrator behind their rise to power. He didn't rely on brute force like others in the business. He understood strategy, manipulation, and most importantly, trust. Marcus surrounded himself with those who were fiercely loyal, creating a network of loyalists who helped protect their territory from rival gangs, corrupt officials, and anyone else who dared to challenge them. Tyrell Bennett, Marcus's right-hand man, was the muscle that held their empire together. Where Marcus calculated every move, Tyrell enforced those decisions with relentless brutality. Known for his imposing figure and short temper, Tyrell was feared throughout the city. It was said that his presence alone could make grown men shake, and his reputation ensured that no one would ever question his authority. Despite their differences, the bond between Marcus and Tyrell was unbreakable, or so it seemed. The duo had turned their operation into a multi-million-dollar enterprise, controlling everything from drug distribution to illegal gambling, all while maintaining an air of invincibility. They had learned the art of hiding in plain sight, running their operations in the shadows while maintaining a semblance of legitimacy. The people of Detroit feared them, but they also respected them. After all, Marcus and Tyrell were responsible for keeping rival gangs in check, maintaining some semblance of order in an otherwise chaotic world. But with power came paranoia. Marcus, once the calm strategist, started noticing small cracks in their operation. Tyrell had been spending more time away from the headquarters, meeting with individuals Marcus didn't recognize. Some of their trusted allies seemed to be acting strangely more distant, more secretive. It was a feeling Marcus couldn't shake, the creeping suspicion that something was amiss. He couldn't afford to ignore it, not with everything he had built on the line. Meanwhile, Tyrell, always the more impulsive one, had grown restless. The constant grind of running the empire was beginning to weigh on him. He wanted more, not just the money, but the control. He resented Marcus's growing influence, wondering if the partnership was still as equal as it had once been. Beneath the surface, Tyrell had begun to question Marcus's leadership, wondering if the time had come to step out of his shadow. It was at this critical moment that Darnell, one of Marcus's most trusted lieutenants, disappeared without a trace. Darnell had been with them from the very beginning. His loyalty was unquestioned. He knew every detail of their operations, and his sudden absence sent shockwaves through the organization. At first, people speculated that Darnell had been arrested or had gone into hiding to avoid a police crackdown. But the more time passed, the more unlikely that explanation seemed. Darnell's disappearance didn't make sense. The city's underworld had always been a game of survival where trust was a currency, and betrayal was the deadliest weapon. Marcus knew that the longer Darnell stayed missing, the more dangerous the game would become. The question weighed heavily on his mind: who could he trust? Was Tyrell's growing distance a sign of something far worse? The first seeds of suspicion had been planted, and what followed would prove to be nothing short of catastrophic. Despite his usual calm and calculated demeanor, Marcus felt a creeping unease that he couldn't ignore. He trusted very few people, and now, with Darnell gone, he was forced to rely even more on Tyrell. But Tyrell had become distant. In the days following Darnell's disappearance, Tyrell seemed preoccupied, as if he was always somewhere else, his mind clearly not focused on the business. At first, Marcus told himself that Tyrell was just worried about their empire, trying to keep everything running smoothly while they dealt with the uncertainty. But something about the way Tyrell had been acting rubbed Marcus the wrong way. There was a subtle shift in Tyrell's behavior, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. The trust between them, once unwavering, was now slowly beginning to crack. The authorities, meanwhile, had begun investigating Darnell's disappearance, but their efforts had stalled. The city of Detroit, already riddled with corruption and fear, was a place where witnesses rarely came forward, and information was hard to come by. Every lead they followed seemed to circle back to a dead end. The case was quickly becoming just another unsolved mystery in the heart of the city. But for Marcus, this wasn't just a missing person case, it was a betrayal. He believed someone within his circle was responsible. The feeling gnawed at him daily, and his suspicions grew more pronounced. His mind turned to Tyrell. The timing of Darnell's disappearance had aligned perfectly with Tyrell's increasing presence in areas of their operations that Marcus once handled. As Marcus started looking into Tyrell's activities, he discovered troubling patterns. Tyrell had been meeting with unknown individuals, something he had never done before. He'd taken more control of decisions that were once Marcus's domain, all while avoiding eye contact and dismissing Marcus's concerns. Marcus knew something was wrong, but the truth seemed just beyond his reach. The tension reached a boiling point when a reliable informant within the city's underground network came forward with shocking news. Tyrell was suspected of aligning himself with a rival gang. The thought was inconceivable, but the pieces of the puzzle were starting to fit together. If Tyrell had orchestrated Darnell's disappearance, it was part of a larger scheme to take control of the empire. Darnell's disappearance wasn't the first sign of a power struggle. It was the first crack in a much larger web of lies and deception that Marcus was only beginning to untangle. It was clear now that the empire they had built together, founded on loyalty and trust, was falling apart. And as the days went on, Marcus's suspicion deepened, leading him to a horrifying realization: Tyrell, his closest ally, may not have just turned on him. He may have been plotting his downfall all along. The walls were closing in, and Marcus knew that he had to act fast. The empire he had worked so hard to build was on the verge of collapse, and soon the truth would come to light. As the investigation into Darnell's disappearance dragged on, Marcus's suspicions regarding Tyrell intensified. The shifting dynamics between them, once marked by an unspoken trust, had begun to feel like a ticking time bomb. The mounting tension in their relationship was palpable, and Marcus could no longer ignore the undeniable signs that something dark was brewing beneath the surface. Tyrell, ever the enforcer, had always been the man of action, but now he seemed to be acting with purpose and secrecy. Marcus observed him closely: Tyrell's meetings, the cryptic phone calls, his increasingly evasive answers when asked about his whereabouts. It wasn't just Darnell's absence that bothered Marcus. It was the way Tyrell had started taking control of parts of their operation without consulting him, as if he had assumed the role of the undisputed leader. Marcus, in turn, grew more withdrawn, suspicious of every move his right-hand man made. The turning point came when Marcus uncovered a series of transactions that seemed out of place: payments to individuals connected to a rival gang, the Savages. This discovery shattered any doubt that Marcus had left about Tyrell's growing treachery. He had been meeting with the enemy, feeding them information about the inner workings of Marcus's operation. It became clear that Tyrell had been planning a coup, positioning himself as the new kingpin, and Darnell's disappearance was merely the first step in a well-thought-out plan to take over. The betrayal hit Marcus hard, not just because of the threat to his empire, but because of the personal nature of the deception. Tyrell was more than just a business partner, he was someone Marcus had considered family. The foundation of their partnership had always been built on mutual respect, but now Marcus realized that respect had been shattered. Tyrell's ambition had consumed him, and he was willing to destroy everything Marcus had worked for in his quest for control. Meanwhile, Tyrell continued to act as though nothing was amiss. He moved through their territory with a sense of entitlement, making decisions that cut Marcus out of the loop, all while keeping his true intentions hidden. His power grab was subtle but calculated, and it was only a matter of time before Marcus would have no choice but to confront him. But the situation was far more dangerous than Marcus had anticipated. Tyrell was no longer the loyal enforcer he had once been. He was now the mastermind of his own criminal empire, and Marcus was in his sights. The inevitable confrontation loomed on the horizon. Marcus knew that his options were running out. He couldn't allow Tyrell to continue building his power unchecked, but confronting him openly meant risking everything. The more Marcus dug into Tyrell's dealings, the more he realized that there was no going back. Tyrell's treachery was so deep that it threatened not only Marcus's empire but his life. The breaking point came when Marcus received word that his younger brother, Eric, had been killed in what appeared to be a random robbery gone wrong. Eric had been close to Marcus, a symbol of everything he was trying to protect. The loss was devastating, but the timing was even more suspicious. Marcus was no fool. This wasn't a random act. It was a message. Tyrell had made his move, and Marcus knew that the betrayal was no longer confined to just business. It had become personal. As Marcus grappled with grief and betrayal, the realization hit him with full force. He had underestimated Tyrell. What had once been a partnership based on loyalty and shared ambition had turned into a deadly game of survival. And now, with his brother's death, Marcus was forced to face the cold, brutal truth. Tyrell was no longer his ally. He was his enemy, and the time to act had come. The battle for control of their empire had begun. The battle between Marcus and Tyrell had reached a boiling point. Marcus, now consumed by anger and the weight of betrayal, had made the decision to take action. He couldn't let Tyrell's plot to overthrow him succeed. But Tyrell, always one step ahead, had already anticipated Marcus's moves and had begun executing his own plan to solidify his control over the empire. It became clear that Tyrell wasn't just trying to take over, he was working with the savages, and his betrayal was much deeper than Marcus had ever feared. The first blow came in the form of an unexpected police raid on one of Marcus's key warehouses. The authorities had been tipped off about a large shipment of drugs that was about to come through, and by the time Marcus's men could respond, the police had already swooped in, arresting several of his top lieutenants and seizing millions of dollars worth of merchandise. It was a devastating hit to their operation, but what stung even more was the realization that Tyrell was likely the one who had provided the information to the authorities. He had made his move, and Marcus was now playing catch-up. As Marcus tried to regain control, he found that the pieces of his empire were quickly slipping from his grasp. Tyrell had started to pull allies from under him, recruiting more members of the crew to his side with promises of power and wealth. The loyalty that had once bound Marcus and Tyrell together was now frayed, replaced by a growing network of betrayal and distrust. The tension between the two men escalated, with each one preparing for the inevitable confrontation. In the midst of the chaos, Marcus received an unexpected piece of news, a tip-off from a source within Tyrell's inner circle. Someone, it seemed, had grown disillusioned with Tyrell's rise to power and was now willing to help Marcus bring him down. This informant, whose identity remained a mystery, provided Marcus with key information about a secret meeting Tyrell was planning with the savages to finalize their alliance. The meeting was set to take place in an abandoned building on the outskirts of Detroit, a location known for its isolation and secrecy. Marcus knew this was his chance to confront Tyrell directly. He gathered his most trusted men, preparing for the showdown that had been brewing for months. The night of the meeting arrived, and Marcus moved quickly, determined to catch Tyrell off guard. The building was eerily quiet when they arrived, the only sound the distant hum of city life outside. They carefully made their way inside, weapons at the ready, knowing that the confrontation could end in violence, perhaps even death. But when they entered the building, they were met with a shocking sight. Tyrell was nowhere to be found, and the room was eerily empty. It was a trap, and Marcus had walked right into it. The sound of police sirens echoed in the distance, growing louder with each passing second. The tip-off had been a lie, a clever ruse to lure Marcus into a vulnerable position. Tyrell had outplayed him once again. As the sirens grew closer, Marcus's heart sank. His plan had backfired. The building, which had seemed so isolated, was now surrounded by law enforcement. The betrayal was complete. Tyrell had tipped off the authorities, and Marcus had unwittingly walked into a police sting. It was all falling apart. The empire Marcus had built was on the verge of collapse, and with Tyrell's manipulation, He had lost the one thing that had kept him in control. In a last-ditch effort, Marcus tried to escape, but the door slammed shut as the police closed in. His fate seemed sealed, but even in the face of imminent capture, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end. The game was far from over. Tyrell may have won this round, but Marcus knew there was more at play. He had one final move left to make, and it was going to be the most dangerous one yet. The question was, would he be able to make it in time before it was too late? Marcus's capture was the beginning of a new chapter, but it wasn't the end of his story. After the failed sting, he was taken into custody, facing a mountain of charges ranging from drug trafficking to murder. As he sat in the cold, sterile cell, the weight of everything that had happened began to sink in. His empire was gone, his most trusted ally had turned on him, and his brother was dead. But even with everything stacked against him, Marcus wasn't ready to give up. He knew the truth of what had happened, and he couldn't let Tyrell walk away unscathed. In the weeks following his arrest, things started to unravel for Tyrell. While Marcus sat in prison, the power Tyrell had so carefully cultivated began to slip through his fingers. The first blow came when police discovered the remains of Darnell Foster. The discovery was a breakthrough in the case that had been dormant for years, and it didn't take long for the forensic evidence to link Tyrell to the murder. Darnell's body had been buried in a shallow grave on the outskirts of the city, and the clues pointed directly to Tyrell's involvement. The long unsolved mystery was finally coming to light, and Tyrell's role in it couldn't be ignored any longer. The investigation into Darnell's death opened the floodgates for a series of revelations. Witnesses who had been too afraid to speak out before began to come forward, detailing Tyrell's activities and his involvement in a string of violent crimes. It became clear that Tyrell hadn't just betrayed Marcus, he had been playing both sides, cutting deals with rival gangs and law enforcement to secure his power. He had manipulated everyone around him, including the very people who had once looked up to him. As the walls closed in on Tyrell, he began to feel the pressure mounting. His empire, once built on fear and control, was disintegrating. His new allies, the Savages, had grown disillusioned with him, realizing that they had been used as pawns in his game. The streets, once loyal to him, began to turn against him, as rumors of his treachery spread like wildfire. Even his most trusted lieutenants started to distance themselves, realizing that their loyalty had been misplaced. Tyrell, the man who had once been feared by all, was now a man on the run. In a final act of desperation, Tyrell made a fateful decision. He fled the city, leaving everything behind: his money, his power, and the empire he had fought so hard to build. But as he disappeared into the night, he was already a marked man. Law enforcement had put out an all-points bulletin, and his name was now synonymous with betrayal and murder. Tyrell's once invincible image was shattered, and the city he had once ruled was now hunting him. Meanwhile, Marcus, though still incarcerated, began to piece together the truth. His name had been cleared in connection with Darnell's murder, and with Tyrell's downfall now in motion, the case against him began to fall apart. In a turn of events that no one could have predicted, Marcus's legal team uncovered critical evidence that not only exonerated him but also implicated Tyrell in a series of other crimes that had previously gone unnoticed. The tables had turned, and the man who had once been the king of Detroit was now on the brink of freedom. Tyrell, now a fugitive, was eventually tracked down in a remote cabin far from Detroit. He was arrested, but the fall from grace was swift and brutal. His trial was a spectacle, with witnesses testifying against him and the evidence mounting in a way that left no room for doubt. Tyrell was convicted on multiple charges, including murder, conspiracy, and racketeering. His reign of terror had come to an end. As for Marcus, his freedom came at a cost. Though he was released from prison, the empire he had once ruled was gone, and the city had moved on without him. But there was one thing Marcus had learned throughout the ordeal: the true price of power. In the end, it wasn't about wealth, control, or even vengeance. It was about survival. And though he had lost everything, Marcus had one final victory. The truth had come to light, and the man who had betrayed him was finally brought to justice. And that brings us to the end of today's story. The tale of Marcus and Tyrell is one of power, greed, and the ultimate price of betrayal. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story from Mystery Minds. Thank you for watching, and remember sometimes the truth is darker than fiction.